Hey everyone, Chris Collard with you again at Gone Jeepin' and 1941 Media. Today in Day in the Shop with Edla, the Expedition de las Americas CJ-7. We are going to be wrapping up that differential, pulling the axles out, inspecting the bearings, taking the brakes apart, and then dropping the springs and the entire AMC 20 out and getting it prepped for a trip down to Ring Pinion Services down in Rancho, Cordova, California to give it a complete makeover. So hope you can stick around.
So because we're going to be sandblasting these axles off, we're going to seal it back up. So I'm going to clean up all of the cork gasket that's on here and the silicone. We'll pull this backing plate, brake assembly, and axle out, and then cap off the ends. Got the diff cover cleaned up and the surface cleaned up. Going to put it back on. I put a thin bead of silicone on the diff cover here because even though we're going to be rebuilding the differential, it's kind of against my religion to let dirt and stuff get inside your differential and your bearings and everything. You know, the other thing is we've got some of the lower edges of the diff cover, and that's where it sits right down here, the most vulnerable spots where it gets drug over rocks. And you can see actually the housing has been kind of scraped off almost down to the bolt, actually down to the bolt holes. So they did weld a plate on, you know, for a protective cover. We'll just take a little segue here. If you notice my nuts are sitting up here in this tray. Odd place for them, huh? Anyway, these little magnetic trays are awesome. Little tech tip. You know, pretty common, but I get these at Harbor Freight. They're like $3. Stick it up there. You know, it doesn't have to be on a level surface because it's magnetic. Okay, so I'll admit, brakes have never been my thing. Why? Well, not like they're, you know, rocket science, but trying to get those springs on, yeah, always a pain. But anyway, so we took the brake assembly off. The emergency brake cable comes off also, 2 bolts off the back, and then pulled the slave cylinder for the brakes off of the backing plate. So we're ready to take the flange mount bolts off, and the axle will slide out. So inside the back of the backing plate, basically there's 4 bolts that are studs that hold the axle flange plate on. But it's actually there's 5. So there's one on the bottom, there's 4, and there's one that's hidden on the bottom. I'm not sure why that one's missing, but it was missing on the other side too. So if you're wondering why I'm wearing a shirt with a big old hole under the arm, well, I could say that it's for ventilation because it is like 100 degrees today. But it's actually I raced with Rod Hall, dear friend of mine, rest his soul, for a couple of years in his vintage Bronco. Same vehicle he won the 1969 Mexican 1000 in, so I had the honor of working with him for a couple of years. Restored the vehicle, raced it. He raced all 50 of the Mexican 1000s and the Baja 1000s. Can't bear to throw it away. Not going to do that, and I just like to wear it because it makes me think of Rod. Crusty. Everything is crusty. There we go. Slipping out of there. So as we pull the backing plate and axle out, you can see the bearing in there. Tapered roller bearing. Held on with a kind of a spacer keeper. And interesting about the one-piece axles from Moser is that when they did this, they actually used a different bearing and a different, there's a spacer in there. So inside the axle is your inner axle seal. That's pretty much what keeps all the grease from getting into the oil, differential oil, from getting into the bearing, wiping that out, leaking all over, wiping out your brakes. So if you're not planning on removing or replacing that seal, you want to be super careful when you pull your axles out, you don't damage it. Of course, we're going to be replacing all these, but just the same, always a good idea to be very gentle on the seals. Just with a little massaging, you can get the bearing race out. We'll take a look at those. They don't look too bad. I'm looking for any kind of scarring or burns on the inner side, the bearing face of the race. The other item that you got in there, I might need to get a puller for this, is the little spacer. Basically spaces your axle bearing and race out to the edge of the flange plate on the end of the axle. One of the challenges of taking the axle housing out is that, your springs are in the way. You got to try to figure out how to like jimmy it all the way out. So I'm just putting a couple of hoist jacks. It'd be nice to have like a transmission jack, but we don't have one, so I'm going to use hoist jack. Got enough room to remove the U-bolt plate or the spring plate and drop the spring out. Now when I do that, when I release the last U-bolt off of the axle, it's going to want to roll forward because it's got all this weight in the differential. So I'm probably going to get something like a strap and hook it onto the yoke. So rather than lowering the lift, I'm just cranking up on the hoist jacks just enough to clear the centering pin on the leaf spring on both sides. And now that it's stable, I'm going to, and the springs are under here as a little support in case something falls off that jack. I'm going to roll the differential down. So I'm going to take the baling wire out. All right, so now you can see the axle is just, if the Jeep wasn't here, if it wasn't on the rack, the axle would just be sitting on the hoist jacks. At that point, now we're just going to take the springs off again and then raise the vehicle up and then we'll pull the axle out. All right, so that was a little trick. So engine hoist. These things are awesome. I mean, besides pulling engines, I often call them a cherry picker, but I've used it to move so many things around the shop. So anyway, yeah, engine hoist. Got our axle out. We're ready to put it out back and sandblast it.
All right, so that's enough for today. Tomorrow I've got the axles outside in the sandblast area. We are going to go to town cleaning this stuff up, start getting stuff into the blast cabinet, make these parts look like new. Man, Edla's not going to know what to do. Hope you can join us. We'll see you next time.